It began with a moment nobody expected. Kate Middleton, Duchess of Cambridge, standing under the harsh glow of studio lights, her composure cracking before the world. For years, she had been the picture of elegance, grace, and unflinching poise, a figure seemingly untouchable by the swirling chaos around the royal family. And yet, there she was, wiping tears from her eyes on live television, revealing a secret so intimate, so raw, that viewers across the globe were left breathless. "I watched the Queen cry before she died," Kate said, her voice barely above a whisper. "And it was about him." The room went silent. Cameras zoomed in, capturing every tremor, every hitch in her breath, every glimmer of emotion she could not contain. For a woman so accustomed to control, this vulnerability was seismic. But what exactly did she mean? And who was the him she referenced? The one who had caused such sorrow in the heart of the Queen herself. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. It is not often that we witness royalty in moments of pure humanity. The public is accustomed to perfection, the polished appearances, the ceremonial smiles, the carefully scripted interviews. But sometimes, behind closed doors, the weight of duty, the sting of betrayal, and the pangs of heartbreak accumulate to a point where even the strongest among them can no longer maintain the facade. Kate's revelation was precisely one of those moments, a window into a private grief that had been carefully shielded from the eyes of the public for decades. And it came at a time when questions about loyalty, family, and legacy are more pressing than ever. Imagine, for a moment, the Queen herself, stoic, regal, a figure who had endured the trials of a lifetime on a global stage. She had faced wars, political upheavals, personal loss, and scandal. Yet, in her final days, it was not public opinion or political pressure that broke her heart. It was the choices of her grandson, Prince Harry, that caused the deepest anguish, the tears Kate had witnessed firsthand. "This isn't the family I raised," the Queen had reportedly said, her voice thick with emotion, tears slipping unbidden down her cheeks. It was a statement loaded with disappointment, love, and an unspoken plea, a lament for a family fractured by decisions that seemed incomprehensible to those who had dedicated their lives to its preservation. And it was Kate Middleton, silently present, observing, absorbing, and later, revealing the weight of those private moments to the world. Why now? Why would Kate, the ever-composed, the diplomat in heels, choose this moment to speak? The answer lies not only in the heartbreak she witnessed, but in the timing of the story itself. In recent years, the royal family has endured a wave of unprecedented scrutiny, fueled by explosive interviews, documentaries, and social media speculation. Prince Harry and Meghan Markle's departure from royal duties, Megxit, shattered traditional expectations and created fissures that ripple outward even today. Amid these shocks, Kate's revelation serves as a rare, unfiltered glimpse into the emotional toll borne by those who remain in the inner sanctum, witnessing the consequences firsthand. And by sharing this story publicly, she forces the world to confront the human element of a monarchy often perceived as cold, distant, or untouchable. The audience reaction was instantaneous. Social media erupted in a frenzy of disbelief, empathy, and speculation. Clips of Kate's tearful confession circulated within minutes, generating debates, op-eds, and viral commentary. But beyond the sensationalism, there was a profound curiosity. What had Prince Harry done that could move the Queen to such tears? And how had Kate, a daughter-in-law who has carefully balanced loyalty and discretion for over a decade, come to bear witness to such a private moment? The story matters because it illuminates the human side of a family constantly scrutinized, revealing cracks and vulnerabilities rarely acknowledged. It matters because it challenges the narrative of infallibility that has long surrounded the royal household. And it matters because it provides context, emotional, historical, and relational, into one of the most controversial figures of modern royalty, Prince Harry. Kate's admission did more than expose a private moment. It also revealed her own emotional stakes. For someone who has spent years navigating the treacherous waters of public expectation, the balance between personal truth and duty is delicate. Kate's tears, caught on camera, were not just for the Queen. They were for herself, for the monarchy, and perhaps for a sense of justice she could not fully articulate. And yet, in that moment, the world saw a duchess unguarded, an image so rare it became impossible to ignore. What made this even more striking was the calm, deliberate way Kate spoke. She did not rant. She did not point fingers. She revealed a profound sadness, a quiet judgment, and an emotional truth, letting the words speak louder than any public statement could. Think about the gravity of what she disclosed. A queen who had guided generations, shaped the public perception of monarchy, and endured personal hardship with legendary composure, was reduced to tears over a family rift. And those tears, observed by Kate Middleton, were not private musings. They were a clear, emotional indictment of choices made by a man whose actions have repeatedly commanded global attention. For the audience, the stakes are high. This is not just royal gossip. This is a window into the emotional anatomy of a family whose decisions influenced not only the public's perception, but also the historical narrative of a monarchy navigating the modern world. There is also a psychological dimension at play. Kate's decision to speak publicly suggests an internal struggle between loyalty and transparency. She carries the weight of her observations, the emotional residue of witnessing grief, and the responsibility of conveying it with both honesty and discretion. Her words, simple yet laden with meaning, highlight a rare complexity, the challenge of being both participant and observer in the unfolding drama of one's own family. This duality, living the experience while translating it for a global audience, is what makes her confession so compelling, so riveting, and ultimately, so unforgettable. But the intrigue does not end there. Kate's revelation hinted at more than the Queen's sorrow. It suggested that the pain she witnessed was part of a broader pattern of tension, secrecy, and unspoken truths. Audiences were left wondering, what other private conversations had taken place behind closed doors? What did Kate hear, but could not share? What subtle dynamics shaped the royal family in those final moments with the Queen? And most importantly, what would happen next? The narrative invites speculation, curiosity, and anticipation, exactly the kind of engagement that ensures viewers remain glued to every word of the story as it unfolds over the next hour. The scene also invites comparisons to history. Throughout time, monarchies have faced challenges that tested the bonds of family, loyalty, and public duty. Scandals, betrayals, and personal missteps have often been publicized with dramatic effect. But rarely do we see the human cost articulated so directly from within the family itself. Kate Middleton, in this moment, bridges that gap. She is both witness and participant, observer and narrator. Her words carry the weight of centuries of royal tradition, while simultaneously delivering the immediacy and rawness of personal grief. This duality is what elevates the story beyond mere gossip. It becomes a study in human emotion, a cautionary tale about choices, and a meditation on the responsibilities of those who inherit both privilege and scrutiny. And yet, the questions linger. Who else was present during these private moments? How did other family members respond to the Queen's heartbreak? Were there attempts at reconciliation, at dialogue, at closure? Kate's account is powerful precisely because it is selective. She chooses to highlight certain elements, to frame the narrative in a way that emphasizes the emotional weight of the Queen's sorrow. But the selective nature of the account creates a tension, a curiosity gap, that compels the audience to wonder, what is left unsaid? What are the details we have yet to uncover? This gap between revelation and mystery fuels engagement, keeping the viewer on edge and eager for every subsequent chapter of the story. By the end of the introduction, viewers are positioned at the precipice of a story that promises drama, heartbreak, and insight. They have seen the human vulnerability of a queen, glimpsed the emotional courage of a duchess, and confronted the consequences of a grandson's controversial choices. And yet, they are left with a tantalizing question. What exactly happened that day, behind closed doors, that would change the royal family forever? What truths did Kate witness, and what remains hidden? The answer is just beyond the next chapter, and the journey to uncover it promises to be as riveting as it is emotionally charged. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. Why now? Why choose this moment to speak? That question raced through every viewer's mind as Kate Middleton wiped a trembling hand across her face, visibly gathering herself before the cameras. The image of her poised composure in past interviews had been shattered, replaced by raw emotion that could not be contained. And yet, there she was, on live television, revealing intimate details that had been locked behind palace walls for decades. Why had she decided to break the silence now? What had reached the tipping point? The day began like any other in the relentless rhythm of royal life. But for Kate, the morning had already been heavy with anticipation. There were calls, texts, and hurried meetings with advisors about the framing of the interview. Every word she planned to speak was measured, every pause calculated. And yet, despite the preparation, no amount of strategy could prepare her for what she was about to reveal. For the first time in public, she would speak not as a duchess fulfilling ceremonial duties, but as a witness to one of the most profound and private moments in royal history: the Queen's grief over her grandson, Prince Harry. The cameras rolled. The lights glared. The studio was quiet, a stillness pregnant with expectation. Kate began slowly, her voice steady at first. She spoke of her love for the Queen, her admiration for the woman who had guided generations, and the lessons she had learned in her years by the Queen's side. But then, a crack appeared in the armor. Her voice faltered. A tear slipped down her cheek, and she said the words that would ripple across the world. "I watched the Queen cry before she died, and it was about him." The audience held its collective breath. Who was him? What had Prince Harry done to pierce the armor of one of the most stoic and revered figures in the world? For Kate, the moment was less about blame and more about truth. She wanted to convey the depth of what she had witnessed, the gravity of a grandmother's heartbreak, and the sorrow that had weighed on the family long before it ever reached the public eye. She spoke of the Queen's tears as if describing a natural disaster, sudden, unstoppable, and utterly transformative. This was not a calculated reveal meant to damage reputations. Kate was acutely aware of the scrutiny her words would receive. The palace had long been a place where appearances mattered more than emotions, where discretion was valued over disclosure. But this moment demanded honesty. The public needed to understand that behind the golden facades of palaces and ceremonial pomp lay real human hearts, capable of sorrow, disappointment, and grief. Kate recounted the precise moment she witnessed the Queen's vulnerability. She described a quiet room, far removed from public view, where the Queen, sitting in a familiar armchair, spoke with a heaviness in her voice that only Kate could hear. "This isn't the family I raised," the Queen had said, her words soaked with sorrow and frustration. The tear tracks on her cheeks glistened under the soft light of the room, and for a fleeting moment, the Queen's composure, the same composure that had guided a nation through decades of change, was gone. Kate, standing just a few steps away, felt the weight of those words settle on her shoulders. She had never anticipated seeing the Queen reduced to such human fragility, and yet, there it was. What made this revelation even more striking was the timing. The interview came at a moment when the world was still digesting the aftershocks of Harry and Meghan's exit from royal duties. Speculation had long swirled about private grievances, financial disputes, and public embarrassments. But Kate's account provided a tangible, emotional layer to the narrative. It wasn't just rumors or gossip anymore. It was an eyewitness testimony from someone deeply embedded within the family. And by sharing it, she shifted the conversation from speculation to reality, grounding public perception in intimate truth. Kate's words were not just descriptive. They were cinematic in their emotional impact. She painted a picture of silence punctuated only by the occasional sigh, of gestures conveying heartbreak more effectively than any statement could, of a Queen whose grief was as much about lost expectations as it was about personal disappointment. Kate spoke of the tension in the air, the unspoken questions hanging between family members, and the quiet moments where she realized that this grief was not fleeting. It was deeply rooted, part of a larger story that stretched back years. As she spoke, the audience began to feel what she felt. The tension in her voice, the subtle breaks, the pauses laden with meaning. All of it conveyed a story far more compelling than any scripted drama. Kate asked the viewers directly, "Have you ever witnessed someone you love breaking down, knowing there was nothing you could do to change it?" Her rhetorical question invited empathy, compelling the audience to place themselves in her position, to imagine the helplessness of standing witness to the unraveling of someone they respected and adored. And yet, for all the sorrow, there was also a sense of duty in Kate's disclosure. She understood that the monarchy was more than a family. It was a symbol, an institution watched by millions, relied upon for continuity and stability. By sharing this story, she was not only recounting an emotional truth, she was highlighting the human stakes behind decisions that had far-reaching consequences. The Queen's tears were not merely private grief. They were indicators of fractures that could shape the future of the monarchy itself. Kate's composure wavered again as she recalled the Queen's words in detail. "This isn't the family I raised," she repeated, emphasizing the depth of the sentiment. There was disappointment. There was pain. But there was also love, a complex, nuanced emotion that underscored every word. The Queen's lament was as much about the erosion of familial bonds as it was about the choices of one individual. And standing there, Kate understood the magnitude of what she had witnessed. The tears were not simply an expression of sadness. They were an indictment, a plea, a lamentation wrapped in the language of royalty and tradition. The audience was captivated not only by the revelation itself, but by the subtle dynamics Kate conveyed. She spoke of the quiet ways in which the Queen expressed her grief, a hand resting on the arm of a chair, a sigh that seemed to carry decades of experience, eyes that conveyed understanding beyond words. Kate's observations were meticulous, each detail chosen to emphasize the humanity behind the monarchy's public persona. It was a masterclass in storytelling, blending the intimate with the historic, the personal with the public. But what made this moment truly riveting was the emotional contradiction at its core. Kate, always composed, always diplomatic, was breaking down as she recounted the breakdown of another. She was both narrator and participant, observer and witness, emotional and restrained, vulnerable and authoritative. The juxtaposition of these roles created tension that gripped the audience. Every word, every pause, every subtle shift in her tone carried meaning. And viewers were left wondering, how much more had she seen, and what truths were yet to be revealed? As the interview progressed, Kate began to hint at the broader implications of what she had witnessed. The Queen's grief was about Harry, yes, but it was also about the ripple effects of his choices on the rest of the family. She spoke of strained relationships, quiet disappointments, and the subtle but undeniable shifts in palace dynamics that had followed Harry's departure. Kate's narrative conveyed both immediacy and reflection, blending real-time emotion with contemplative insight. The audience could feel the weight of history pressing down, could sense the gravity of moments that had previously been hidden from public view. By the end of the segment, viewers were left with a haunting image. Kate standing under the studio lights, visibly shaken, recounting the Queen's tears and sorrow. The confession was not sensationalist. It was deliberate, precise, and emotionally devastating. It invited speculation, yes, but it also demanded empathy. For a fleeting moment, the audience was allowed to see the monarchy not as a distant institution, but as a family grappling with real, human consequences. And just when it seemed the moment could not become more intense, Kate dropped another hint, a subtle, almost imperceptible pause followed by the words that would propel the story forward. There was more, she implied, much more. Secrets that had never been spoken publicly, decisions that had reshaped the family, and tensions that had quietly escalated behind closed doors. What came next, she suggested, would shed light on not just the Queen's heartbreak, but on the choices of those around her, and the consequences that reverberate to this day. The camera stayed on her. The audience leaned in. And as Kate's voice quavered one last time, she left the room with a question that hung in the air, unspoken yet deafening. What could be so devastating that it moved the Queen to tears, that compelled Kate to break her silence? And that might still be reshaping the monarchy even now? But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. Have you ever wondered what it feels like to witness someone you admire most in the world break apart, just for a fleeting moment? To see the very person who seemed untouchable, whose composure had been a lighthouse for generations, suddenly reveal raw vulnerability? For Kate Middleton, that moment wasn't hypothetical. It was real. It happened in the quiet corridors of Buckingham Palace, away from the flashing cameras, the microphones, the prying eyes of the press. It happened in a room that held decades of family history, whispered secrets, and the weight of duty heavier than any crown. Kate had been summoned, or, more accurately, invited, to spend time with the Queen in what was meant to be a routine private meeting. But that morning, the atmosphere in the palace was different. There was tension in the air, a heaviness that pressed down even before Kate stepped into the room. The Queen was usually composed, regal, and imperturbable in private just as much as in public. But that day, she seemed fragile. Her hands were clasped tightly, her eyes distant, and there was a faint tremor in her voice that Kate noticed immediately. Something had shifted, and Kate instinctively knew she was about to witness something profound. The Queen's living room, lined with ancestral portraits and the quiet hum of history, became the stage for a moment that would later shape Kate's understanding of the family and its inner dynamics. Kate described it as a room filled with an almost tangible sadness, the kind that sits in the air and makes you hold your breath. And she was right, because what followed was not mere disappointment, but a grief so deep it seemed to settle into the very walls around them. The Queen began to speak, not in the measured, composed tones of official addresses, but in the voice of a grandmother. "This isn't the family I raised," she said, and her words hung in the air, weighted with years of love, frustration, and sorrow. Kate watched, almost paralyzed, as the Queen's composure gave way to tears. Not the controlled, discreet tears of public appearances, but the kind that escapes when the heart cannot contain its own pain. Her hands trembled, and she dabbed at her eyes, unwilling or unable to speak further. For Kate, this was shocking, not because of the tears themselves, but because of what they represented. An unfiltered window into the Queen's private anguish, the emotional toll of her grandson's choices, and the realization that even the most stoic among us have limits. Kate tried to console her, placing a gentle hand on the Queen's arm, speaking softly. But words felt inadequate. The Queen's grief was not something to be fixed, patched, or soothed. It was a storm that had been building over time, and it could only be endured. Kate later admitted she felt powerless in that moment, like an observer of history rather than an active participant. She was standing at the intersection of private sorrow and public responsibility, tasked with witnessing the emotional truth of the monarchy without altering it. It was then that Kate noticed the Queen's eyes, full of a mixture of disappointment and love. She realized that the grief was not solely about Harry's actions or choices, but about the erosion of family cohesion, the ripple effects of decisions that had torn apart the delicate fabric of relationships that had taken decades to weave. She wasn't angry, Kate explained later. She was heartbroken, as if she had been watching her family drift away from her all along. The image of a queen, whose life had been dedicated to public duty, reduced to such raw emotion, was something Kate would carry with her forever. The conversation continued, slow and halting at first, with Kate listening more than speaking. She absorbed the gravity of every word, the subtle inflections, the weight of a legacy being questioned, and the private pain that had never been aired. The Queen spoke of missed connections, broken expectations, and the choices of a grandson who had strayed from the path she had hoped for him. Each phrase seemed to carry the weight of decades, every pause pregnant with meaning. Kate noted the irony. The world knew of public scandals, rumors, and controversies, but they did not know the depth of the personal sorrow behind the palace doors. Kate's observations during this private moment were precise. She described the way the Queen's hands moved, the slight shake in her fingers, and the way her eyes would drift toward a portrait or memento, as if seeking guidance from the past. Each gesture spoke volumes, conveying emotions words could not capture. Kate, trained in diplomacy and observation, understood that these subtle signals were as revealing as the Queen's spoken words. They spoke of disappointment, love, worry, and a profound sadness that the world would never fully comprehend. As the minutes passed, Kate noticed something else. The Queen's focus was singular. She wasn't lamenting her public image or debating political implications. Her sorrow was entirely about family. It was about relationships strained beyond repair, promises broken, and a future she feared might be compromised by decisions made out of youthful rebellion or misguided independence. Kate described the Queen's grief as not just about the choices themselves, but about what those choices said about the values, the loyalty, and the love that bind a family together. Kate also reflected on the contradictions of the moment. The queen had spent her life teaching resilience, duty, and perseverance. She had weathered storms that would have felled lesser individuals. And yet, in the quiet of her private rooms, she was undone, not by the press, not by politics, not by scandal, but by the emotional fractures within her own family. It was a paradox that Kate struggled to reconcile. The strongest figure she had ever known, vulnerable and heartbroken over deeply personal matters. There were moments of silence, long stretches where neither Kate nor the queen spoke, and yet communication was happening. Every glance, every sigh, every subtle shift in posture conveyed volumes. Kate later reflected that these silences were more telling than any words could have been. They spoke of grief, of contemplation, of reflection, and of the immense weight of responsibility carried by those at the top of a family and a nation. The queen's sorrow was a story told in gestures, in pauses, in the quiet hum of history echoing through the palace walls. And yet, amid the grief, Kate also noticed glimpses of hope, of love, and of resilience. The queen's tears were not the end. They were a testament to her humanity, her capacity for emotion, and her enduring care for her family. Kate understood then that what she witnessed was not weakness, but the ultimate strength. The courage to feel deeply, to confront disappointment honestly, and to allow herself to experience grief fully before returning to the public face of duty and composure. By the end of that private moment, Kate had a new understanding of the queen, of family, and of herself. She realized the enormity of what she had seen, a matriarch confronting the consequences of choices that threatened the cohesion of her family. And she understood the responsibility she now carried. To witness, to remember, and, when the time was right, to reveal a glimpse of the truth. Her recounting of that moment would later shock the world precisely because it was authentic, unfiltered, and deeply human. Kate's reflections did not stop at observation. She also contemplated the impact on herself and her role within the family. She saw firsthand the delicate balance between duty and emotion, public image and private truth. And she knew that this moment would shape her decisions, her priorities, and the way she engaged with both family and the public for years to come. The weight of what she had witnessed settled over her like a mantle, heavy yet undeniable, and she understood that some truths, once seen, cannot be unobserved. And just when Kate thought she had processed all that could be processed in that quiet room, the queen leaned closer and whispered something that Kate would never forget. It was a single line, almost inaudible, yet charged with meaning. She said. Kate paused in the interview, her eyes glistening. "This isn't the family I raised." And she wept. The simplicity of the words belied their weight. The emotional resonance was staggering. Kate's presence had made her witness to history, to grief, and to an intimate truth that the world would now demand answers for. The audience watching at home felt the intensity of this revelation, as Kate's calm narration slowly gave way to the tremors of memory and emotion. Viewers could sense the gravity of a monarchy facing internal crisis, the weight of unspoken disappointment, and the echoes of personal heartbreak that reverberated far beyond the walls of the palace. And as Kate's story unfolded, the audience was left with a question. What could have caused such profound sorrow? What actions or decisions had led to this moment of vulnerability in a woman who had weathered a lifetime of public scrutiny and private loss? But just as the tension reached its peak, Kate hinted that what she had witnessed was only part of the story. The grief of that private moment was not isolated. It was a symptom of a larger pattern, one that would soon reveal truths about relationships, loyalty, and choices that had never before been made public. And she knew. Her revelation would change everything, challenging assumptions, reshaping narratives, and forcing the world to confront a royal family in ways no one could have predicted. What came next, she suggested, was a revelation that went beyond grief. It was a truth that would link past decisions, family tensions, and the legacy of one of the most influential monarchs in history. And it was a truth that would ultimately bring Kate and the world face to face with the consequences of choices made behind closed doors. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. Have you ever wondered what it feels like to see someone you love most in the world carry a pain that seems unbearable, yet remain completely composed for everyone else? The Queen had done it for decades, shielding herself from the world while navigating crises, scandals, and personal loss. She had mastered the art of stoicism. But in her final days, that stoicism faltered, and Kate Middleton was there to witness it. It wasn't just sorrow she saw in the Queen's eyes. It was heartbreak. The kind of heartbreak that comes from watching someone repeatedly make choices that hurt not only themselves, but everyone who loves them. And it wasn't abstract or distant. It was personal. It was about her grandson, Prince Harry, and the path he had chosen, a path that had increasingly put him at odds with the family, the monarchy, and, ultimately, the legacy of Queen Elizabeth herself. Kate remembered the precise words, whispered in a room stripped of ceremony and protocol. "This isn't the family I raised." It was simple, yet devastating. In those words lay decades of love, expectation, and disappointment. The Queen's heartbreak was about the divergence of values, the breaking of bonds, and the weight of unfulfilled hopes. She had built a life of loyalty, duty, and family cohesion, and yet here was her grandson, making choices that threatened everything she had worked for. The room felt heavy. Time seemed to slow as the Queen reflected, her hands gripping the armrests of her chair as if seeking stability in a world that had shifted beneath her. Kate, standing quietly by, could feel the tension, the grief, and the almost palpable sense of betrayal. The Queen's tears were not sudden or haphazard. They were measured by a lifetime of restraint, yet impossible to contain. They were a silent scream, a mourning for a family fractured and a legacy challenged. The emotional weight of the moment was compounded by Kate's understanding of Harry's recent actions. She had seen the ripple effects, the strained relationships, the whispered conversations in hallways, the subtle yet unmistakable shifts in palace dynamics. Harry's departure, his public statements, and his controversial choices had not only shaken the monarchy externally, but had caused a profound internal crisis. The Queen's grief, observed by Kate, was therefore multi-layered. It was sorrow for a grandson she loved, frustration at decisions she could not reverse, and heartbreak for a family that was slowly unraveling under the weight of its own complexities. Kate described how the Queen, in her vulnerability, reflected on more than just personal pain. She spoke of values lost, of traditions that had guided the family for generations, and of the emotional consequences of decisions that seemed to disregard those bonds. She wasn't just crying about Harry, Kate explained later. She was crying for the family as a whole, for the institution, and for the legacy she had tried so hard to protect. The tears were not a single-threaded emotion. They were a tapestry of sorrow, fear, and frustration. In recounting the moment, Kate also highlighted the subtleties that made the Queen's heartbreak so poignant. The way her eyes lingered on portraits of past monarchs, as if seeking guidance or perhaps understanding. The small, almost imperceptible shake of her hand as she reached for a teacup, a mundane gesture suddenly imbued with emotional weight. The pause before every sentence, as though she were measuring the impact of her words not just for Kate, but for the unseen audience of history. Every movement, every glance, every sigh spoke volumes about the depth of her feelings. What made the moment even more striking was the contradiction inherent in it. The Queen, who had faced global crises with unmatched composure, was undone by family. Politics, scandals, international pressure, none of that had moved her like the choices of a grandson she had adored since birth. Kate reflected on this contrast. Here was a woman who had mastered every public crisis, now grappling with private sorrow that she could neither escape nor fully articulate. And standing there, Kate realized she was witnessing history, not the kind written in books, but the kind written in human emotion, raw and unfiltered. Kate also reflected on the Queen's humanity in this moment. Observing her tears, her sighs, and her quiet lamentations, she realized that this was not weakness. It was the culmination of a lifetime of love, sacrifice, and emotional investment in a family that had, at times, resisted those very bonds. The Queen's heartbreak was proof of her depth, her capacity for feeling, and her unwavering commitment to the principles she had raised her family to uphold. Yet it was also proof that even the strongest can be deeply wounded when those principles are challenged. And then came the moments that revealed the full scope of the grief. The Queen spoke of Harry specifically, the choices he had made, and the consequences those choices had had on his family. Kate described it as a conversation filled with pauses, glances, and sighs, every word measured yet heavy with meaning. The Queen expressed disappointment not only in actions but in the trajectory of a life, the potential squandered, and the pain inflicted upon others. She loved him, Kate emphasized later, but she was heartbroken over the path he had taken and over what it meant for the family she loved. Kate recounted the emotional contradictions as well. The Queen's words were tender and loving, yet sharp and accusatory. Her voice carried warmth and sadness simultaneously. It was a testament to the complexity of emotion when loyalty, love, disappointment, and fear intertwine. Kate could feel the weight of history pressing down in the room, the echoes of generations who had faced similar challenges, and the realization that the monarchy's public image often conceals deep, private struggles. As the conversation deepened, Kate noticed a shift in the Queen. The tears became less controlled, the sighs more pronounced, and the words more direct. It was not simply sorrow. It was an attempt to communicate, to impart understanding, and perhaps to guide. "This isn't the family I raised," she repeated, her voice catching. But within that repetition was a lesson. The pain of disappointment can coexist with love. Heartbreak can be expressed without bitterness. And truth, when spoken gently, can carry a force that reshapes understanding. Kate's role in the moment was complex. She was both witness and participant, absorbing the gravity of the Queen's sorrow while also attempting to provide comfort. She later admitted that the experience was emotionally overwhelming. Standing in that room, she felt the enormity of responsibility, not just as a daughter-in-law, but as someone who had now become a keeper of a private truth. She understood that what she had witnessed could never be fully conveyed to the world, yet she also knew that portions of it could not remain hidden forever. The gravity of the Queen's heartbreak extended beyond Harry. It was a reflection of the fractures that had grown over time, the subtle betrayals, and the choices that had disrupted the delicate balance of family and duty. Kate realized that the Queen's grief was both personal and emblematic, a mirror reflecting the tensions inherent in maintaining tradition while navigating modernity, loyalty while managing independence, and love while confronting disappointment. As Kate processed what she had seen, she was struck by the Queen's resilience. Despite her tears, her sorrow, and the weight of disappointment, she remained present, conscious, and composed. It was a paradox. The strongest woman Kate had ever known, deeply wounded yet unyielding in her resolve. This duality, strength paired with vulnerability, was what made the moment so unforgettable. Kate's recollection of it would later resonate with audiences because it revealed a side of the Queen rarely seen, a side that humanized her in ways that ceremonial appearances never could. And just when Kate thought the conversation had reached its deepest point, the Queen leaned forward and spoke of something more specific, something that would change how Kate viewed not just Harry, but the entire trajectory of the family. The words were delivered softly, almost hesitant, yet with a force that left no doubt as to their significance. The grief was not abstract. It was about one person, one choice, one act that had caused disproportionate sorrow. And in that quiet, tension-filled moment, Kate realized the enormity of the story she would later reveal. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. Have you ever wondered what really happens behind palace doors, away from the public eye? The royal family is often seen as a flawless, unshakable institution. The cameras show smiles, handshakes, and public ceremonies, but the truth, the raw, human truth, often lives in private corridors and quiet rooms. For Kate Middleton, witnessing the Queen's heartbreak was only the beginning. What followed revealed the deeper layers of tension and impact that Prince Harry and Meghan Markle had brought into the family dynamic, the ripples of which would be felt for years to come. Kate remembered the first time she truly understood the scope of the change. It wasn't in a scandalous headline or a viral clip. It was in hushed conversations, in subtle pauses during family dinners, in the small but telling gestures of avoidance, hesitation, and unspoken frustration. The Queen's grief, Kate realized, was only one part of a larger picture. A family struggling to reconcile love, duty, and personal choices with the unyielding expectations of tradition and public perception. Meghan Markle's entry into the family had always been framed publicly as a modern fairy tale, a young American actress marrying a British prince, bringing energy, style, and a breath of fresh air to centuries of tradition. But behind closed doors, the story was more complicated. Kate observed firsthand the subtle tensions, the microaggressions, and the small but accumulating instances of friction that often go unnoticed in public. It wasn't malicious at first. It was difference, culture, and personality colliding with the weight of expectation. And for the Queen, watching these dynamics unfold was both painful and heartbreaking. Kate recounted moments when the impact of Harry and Meghan's choices became impossible to ignore. Meetings that were meant to foster unity became strained. Conversations that were once casual were now laced with caution. Family dinners, ceremonies, and even private gatherings began to carry an unspoken tension. Kate described the atmosphere as a pressure cooker, silent but intense, where every glance and gesture seemed loaded with hidden meaning. The Queen, accustomed to managing crises on a national or international scale, was navigating a more intimate and personal battlefield, one where emotions could not be easily managed or controlled. The emotional weight was not simply about disagreement or different viewpoints. It was about the consequences of actions that threatened to unravel the carefully maintained bonds of family and monarchy. Kate observed how the Queen's sorrow deepened over Harry's choices, not merely leaving royal duties, but speaking publicly in ways that challenged tradition, undermined confidence in the monarchy, and shifted public perception. Each public statement, each interview, each step that seemed to ignore protocol added layers of strain and heartbreak for those still within the palace walls. Kate spoke of the contradiction she witnessed in these moments. On one hand, the Queen loved her grandson deeply. Her care for Harry was unwavering, nurtured over decades. On the other hand, she could not ignore the impact of his choices on the family, the monarchy, or the legacy she had spent a lifetime building. This duality, a love that does not excuse, an authority that demands accountability, was at the heart of the Queen's grief, and Kate understood that fully. She saw it in the Queen's eyes, heard it in her words, and felt it in the tense air of the palace. The tension extended beyond the Queen to the rest of the family. Kate observed subtle shifts in behavior from other members, wary glances, quiet disagreements, and moments of discomfort that had not existed before. Relationships that had once been fluid and natural now required careful navigation. Kate herself had to consider every interaction with Meghan, every conversation about Harry, in light of the emotional landscape she had witnessed. She became acutely aware that the decisions of one couple could send shockwaves through an entire institution, affecting not only relationships but the perception and stability of the monarchy itself. Kate's reflections on this period were punctuated by stories of small, telling incidents. A birthday dinner that ended abruptly, a family portrait session where smiles did not quite reach the eyes, a casual conversation that revealed hidden resentment. Each event was minor in isolation, but collectively they painted a picture of a family under strain. Kate likened it to a dam that had developed cracks, seemingly stable, but under pressure, ready to burst. And the Queen's tears, witnessed by Kate, were evidence that the pressure had reached a breaking point. What made the situation even more complicated was Meghan's public persona. Kate recognized that Meghan was navigating her own pressures, media scrutiny, public expectation, and personal ambitions. But the difference between the public image and the private impact was stark. In public, Meghan's actions were celebrated or criticized depending on perspective. In private, they caused confusion, tension, and heartbreak for those who had to live with the consequences. Kate, ever observant, noted the contrast and understood that the friction was not rooted solely in personalities but in the collision of expectation, tradition, and personal choice. The emotional stakes were amplified by Harry's unwavering loyalty to Meghan. Every attempt at mediation or reconciliation was complicated by his commitment to supporting his wife. This created a delicate triangle of influence, loyalty, and consequence. The Queen's heartbreak, Kate realized, was in part fueled by witnessing this unwavering allegiance, which, though born of love, often translated into actions that alienated other family members. It was a paradox of intention versus impact, a lesson in how love can sometimes exacerbate conflict rather than resolve it. Kate also reflected on the long-term consequences of these dynamics. The Queen's tears were not just about temporary conflict. They were about the potential reshaping of the monarchy's legacy. Each choice, each public statement, each act of defiance against tradition had implications far beyond the immediate moment. The emotional toll on those within the palace was profound, with each family member bearing a weight that often went unnoticed. Kate, observing it all, felt a mix of empathy, frustration, and responsibility. She realized that understanding and navigating these dynamics required both emotional intelligence and strategic thinking, a balance she would need to maintain for years to come. In her recounting, Kate spoke candidly about the personal lessons she learned during this period. She learned the power of observation, the importance of timing, and the necessity of empathy when navigating complex family dynamics. She also realized that grief, disappointment, and tension could coexist with love and loyalty. The emotional landscape of the royal family was intricate, filled with contradictions, and defined by moments that could never be fully explained to the public. Yet Kate, by sharing her experience, offered a glimpse into this intricate tapestry, showing the human side of decisions that, for outsiders, might appear simple or superficial. The Queen's heartbreak over Harry and Meghan's choices was not a fleeting moment. It was the culmination of years of observations, conversations, and disappointments. Kate described the emotional buildup she witnessed, the slow accumulation of tension, the small, repeated signs of strain, and the moments of subtle heartbreak that preceded the dramatic tears. And she emphasized that the Queen's sorrow was not aimed at public perception or image. It was deeply personal, rooted in the bonds of family, the erosion of trust, and the fear of a legacy threatened. As Kate reflected, she also noted moments of irony. The family that had been idealized, studied, and romanticized by the public was, in private, grappling with ordinary human struggles, disappointment, misunderstanding, and the challenge of maintaining relationships amid differing values and priorities. Kate's observations revealed that royalty, no matter how elevated, is not immune to the complexities of love, loyalty, and heartbreak, and the consequences of choices made in private could resonate publicly, intensifying scrutiny, speculation, and debate. By the end of her private observation, Kate realized the weight of what she had seen. The Queen's grief, Harry and Meghan's impact, and the subtle fractures within the family were not isolated incidents. They were part of a larger narrative that demanded acknowledgement. Kate understood that she was now a keeper of this truth, entrusted with knowledge that could reshape public understanding and perception. She also knew that the world would eventually learn fragments of this story, and when it did, the emotional stakes would be higher than anyone could anticipate. And just when Kate thought the story had reached its deepest level, she glimpsed something even more startling. The Queen, in the quiet of her private room, referenced specific actions, moments, and conversations that revealed the true scale of the impact Harry and Meghan had on the family, details that were never intended for public disclosure. Kate realized that these revelations, when shared, would not just inform but shock the world, forcing a reconsideration of everything previously assumed about loyalty, love, and family dynamics within the palace. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. Have you ever felt the weight of history pressing down on a single moment? The kind of moment where time seems to stretch, silence becomes deafening, and every breath carries the significance of generations? For Kate Middleton, witnessing the Queen's final days was exactly that. She was standing not just in the presence of a monarch, but in the presence of history, observing a woman whose life had shaped the course of a nation unravel in the quietest, most intimate ways. And for Kate, every heartbeat, every sigh, every tear was a lesson she would never forget. The days leading up to the Queen's death were unlike anything the public could imagine. To the world, she remained composed, carrying out engagements, attending ceremonial duties, and maintaining the stoic grace that had defined her reign. But behind closed doors, the atmosphere was markedly different. Kate described it as a tension that hummed in the air, a quiet sorrow that clung to every room, every corridor. The palace, usually alive with staff and ceremonial activity, felt subdued, almost reverent in its hush. There was a collective understanding among those present that something monumental was approaching, something that went beyond protocol or duty. Kate's presence during these days was not ceremonial. She was there as a daughter-in-law, as a confidant, and as a witness to the deeply human side of a woman who had, for decades, appeared untouchable. She recounted moments where the Queen, despite her failing health and evident fatigue, spoke with clarity, wit, and a careful awareness of her surroundings. Yet there were also moments when her vulnerability broke through. A hand resting a little too long on an armrest, a glance that lingered with unspoken worry, and, at times, a quiet weeping when she thought no one was looking. Kate, standing quietly, absorbing the weight of these moments, felt a mixture of awe, fear, and a deep understanding of the responsibility of bearing witness. The Queen's sorrow was deeply entwined with her reflections on family. Kate observed how every conversation, every expression, carried layers of meaning. It wasn't just about Harry or Meghan. It was about the cumulative weight of choices, misunderstandings, and moments of distance that had quietly accumulated over decades. The Queen spoke less about public perception during these days and more about what had gone wrong within the family she had devoted her life to nurturing. Kate described these discussions as heavy, thoughtful, and heartbreaking, like watching someone carrying a mountain of grief that no one else can see. One of the most striking aspects of the Queen's final days, Kate noted, was the paradox of her presence. Publicly, she continued to meet dignitaries, attend engagements, and fulfill her duties with the impeccable composure expected of her. Privately, however, she displayed a depth of emotion that few had ever witnessed. Kate described the juxtaposition as standing on the edge of two worlds: the world everyone sees, polished and precise, and the world hidden behind walls, where emotion reigns and humanity is undeniable. It was in this duality that Kate realized the immense burden the Queen carried, the weight of being both a symbol and a person, revered and expected to endure beyond natural human limits. Kate recounted the moments she spent in quiet observation, often sitting near the Queen, listening without interrupting, absorbing every sigh, every glance, every word. There was a moment when the Queen, tired yet resolute, spoke directly to Kate about the state of the family, about her concerns, and about the sadness she felt over her grandson. "It's not anger," Kate recalled her saying. "It's sorrow. Sorrow for what could have been and what may never be." Those words were simple but powerful, revealing the depth of the Queen's grief and the clarity of her understanding about the fractured dynamics she had been forced to navigate. What struck Kate most was the Queen's enduring awareness. Even in her final days, she seemed to understand the broader implications of every action, every word, every relationship. Her sorrow was not just personal. It was a reflection on the institution, the monarchy, and the family legacy. Kate realized that the Queen's tears were as much about historical consequence as they were about emotional pain. She was witnessing the weight of a lifetime compressed into final, intimate reflections. The emotional intensity of these days reached its peak when the Queen spoke of Harry and Meghan directly. Kate recalled how her own breath caught at the weight of the words. The decisions of some can affect many, and when they do, the pain echoes further than they imagine. Kate realized that the Queen was expressing both love and disappointment simultaneously, a duality that few could navigate. She was heartbroken for the choices Harry had made, for the distance that had grown between them, and for the subtle but undeniable effects those choices had on the rest of the family. Kate also observed the Queen's interactions with other family members during these final days. There was a careful balance between care and caution, an unspoken attempt to maintain harmony while acknowledging grievances that had festered over time. Kate described the Queen's demeanor as both commanding and tender, strategic and profoundly human. It was in these interactions that Kate truly understood the complexity of leadership within the family, a leadership that required not only diplomacy, but also emotional resilience and an unwavering sense of responsibility. There were moments when the Queen allowed herself small intimacies, fleeting but deeply revealing. A soft laugh at a shared memory, a tear shed while recalling a private moment, or a gentle hand placed on Kate's shoulder as if to seek understanding and solidarity. These moments, Kate noted, were rare but profoundly significant. They offered insight into a monarch who, despite decades of public scrutiny, was still deeply human, capable of joy, grief, and the full spectrum of emotion. One particularly poignant instance stayed with Kate. The Queen, weary but lucid, spoke of her fears regarding the family's future, of the legacy she hoped to leave, and of the decisions she wished had been different. She reflected on Harry's choices, on the distance created, and on the sorrow that came from loving someone who had, through no malice, chosen a path apart from her expectations. Kate described it as watching someone reconcile love with disappointment, guidance with helplessness, and tradition with personal choice all at once. And then, in a moment that would forever define Kate's understanding of the Queen, the monarch admitted aloud, in a whisper that carried the weight of decades, "This isn't the family I raised." The words were simple yet devastating, and the tears that followed were both private and monumental. Kate, witnessing this, felt the gravity of every decision, every choice, every moment that had led to this heartbreak. She understood the human cost of the monarchy, the way public duty and personal love often collided, sometimes violently, in private spaces. As Kate reflected on the Queen's final days, she realized that this experience had reshaped her perception of the family, of loyalty, and of her own role within the institution. The lessons were clear. Compassion is necessary, observation is critical, and bearing witness to truth, no matter how painful, is both a duty and a privilege. Kate had seen the depth of sorrow, the subtle fractures in relationships, and the extraordinary courage required to maintain dignity amid profound emotional strain. Yet, even in this weighty reflection, Kate hinted at more. The Queen's sorrow, while immense, was not isolated. It was connected to a series of decisions, choices, and actions that had set off a chain reaction throughout the family. And within that chain reaction, Kate had glimpsed truths that were almost too powerful to articulate, truths about loyalty, betrayal, and the enduring consequences of individual choices. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. Have you ever sensed that a storm is coming long before anyone else notices? That uneasy tension in the air, the subtle signs that something is about to break? For the royal family, that storm had been building for years. And in Kate Middleton's experience, the final days of the Queen exposed just how volatile the family dynamics had become. What had once been minor disagreements and quiet frustrations had now escalated into tensions that threatened to fracture the very foundation of the monarchy. Kate recalled the first moments she noticed the extent of the tension. It wasn't in loud arguments or public confrontations. It was in the quiet exchanges between family members, glances that lingered too long, pauses filled with unspoken words, subtle sighs that carried decades of frustration. Even in ceremonies that required composure, Kate could sense the weight of suppressed emotions. She described it as a tension that vibrated beneath every handshake, every smile, every carefully chosen word. And it was not just the Queen who bore this weight. It was felt by everyone who remained within the inner circle, including herself. At the center of the storm were Harry and Meghan. Their decisions, leaving royal duties, speaking publicly about grievances, and challenging centuries of protocol, had caused shockwaves that the family could no longer ignore. Kate observed how the Queen's heartbreak over Harry had translated into broader strain, impacting relationships, communications, and the emotional stability of those around her. Each public action by the couple seemed to echo within the palace walls, amplifying tension and magnifying frustration. Kate described the moments leading up to confrontations as almost cinematic. A birthday gathering would seem calm on the surface, smiles would be exchanged,